What's happening, guys and girls? Acrinator here, and welcome to what is likely going to be the last Tomb Raider video on this channel for quite a while. If you've been following the channel, you'll likely already know that we just finished a Let's Play, and it's time to give it a rating and recommendation. So with all of that out of the way, let's dive straight into this review of Tomb Raider 2013. This reboot of the Tomb Raider franchise is a very significant game for me, as it's one of the first games I actually bought on Steam. Up until that point, I had stuck with searching out the best free-to-play games like Path of Exile and Team Fortress 2. Being a college kid and having the appropriate funds for that role, I didn't want to break the bank. But I also didn't want to sacrifice any quality for my entertainment, so I did what any normal human being does when they owe more debt than they have in savings. I waited for sales to come around. I don't remember the exact amount to the penny that I paid for Tomb Raider, but I do recall that it was right around $4 at the time. Being a game that was developed by Crystal Dynamics and published by Square Enix, both of which I was already familiar with, I was more than willing to take a chance. I had never really been one for the older titles in the Tomb Raider franchise, nor for the cheesy Angelina Jolie movies, but it's hard to argue with universal acclaim such as this. Once everything finished installing and I dove into the game for the first time, I was pleasantly surprised with what I found. As someone who loves diving deep into story-rich games, the predominant cutscenes and cinematics were great to see. The voice acting was top-notch and the graphics were enough to take my breath away. Though I will admit that it may not have aged flawlessly over the nearly 4 years since its release, the visuals certainly get the message across well enough. While newer releases may have a prettier coat of varnish slapped on, most that I've seen can't begin to compete with Tomb Raider's story. Getting to watch a young Laura start as an archaeology student and eventually become the bona fide badass she's famous for being is quite the adventure. There's a lot to be said for the main character's progression from knowing nothing of survival to being a force to be reckoned with. And it's not just Laura that's written well, but pretty much all of the major supporting characters. From the thrifty Roth to the unstable Matthias and even the bumbling idiot otherwise known as Dr. Whitman, each of these characters play their roles flawlessly, even if they are no good worthless piles of refuse that deserve nothing less than to relive this one moment over and over and over again. But maybe that's getting a bit too emotional, when the fact of the matter is that each character had their purpose. No matter how minuscule or major their actions were to the overall story, you're guaranteed to feel something, and a different something for each and every one of them. It's likely much to the credit of Brianna Pratchett for piecing together one hell of an emotional story. For a game where you're constantly being put into situations of kill or be killed, some of the deaths of Laura's crewmates are nothing short of devastating. I'll let Whitman slide through this bit since, let's be honest, the bastard had it coming. But the others who were lost to the island, Grimm, Alex, and especially Roth, left a lasting impact on Laura. Pratchett has flexed her creative muscles on other projects before and since the Tomb Raider reboot, and it's a shame that she won't be lending her talents to any future projects past the Rise sequel, but let's stick to the game at hand for now. The story that we are given is beautifully crafted and one of the most captivating games in recent years. Despite the story, however, the game does suffer in other categories of its design. The first thing that you'll likely notice after the introductory levels is all the button mashing required for certain segments. Whether it be on the keyboard or a controller, these bits can be just short of insufferable at times. To be fair, these instances are far and few between, as they usually occur during certain boss fights. That being said, it is entirely possible that you get stuck on a specific part for minutes on end, and if you're not capable of switching from controller to keyboard or vice versa like I am, it may be nigh impossible to clear. Another big thing that you're going to notice, which may actually come first depending on how picky you are, is the inconsistent performance. Because of the weather dynamics of the game, performance can sometimes become an issue. Don't get me wrong, I could probably count on one hand all the instances of this being truly obstructive to the gaming experience, but it's still worth mentioning for those who care about such things. It's much more common to experience frame drops of somewhere in the realm of down to 30, which is absolutely playable, but it may not be enjoyable for the more rigid performance junkies. You can minimize this by turning down your graphical settings to medium or even low, but I haven't found a way to get rid of this problem entirely. Once you get past the slight performance issues, there are some problems with the gameplay itself as well, though I will put a disclaimer here, these aren't half as major as I may make them out to be, so don't let these complaints in particular turn you away from trying out the game. Tomb Raider is a very open-ended style action-adventure that provides the player with sections of non-stop fighting and traditional shooting combat before switching over to puzzles that require you to sit down and think for minutes on end. The former is the one you're going to find the most problems with, just for the sheer amount of it present throughout the campaign. If you watched even just one episode of my Let's Play of this game, you'd know that I wasn't overly fond of the shooting portions. I will wholeheartedly admit that shooters aren't normally my first choice when playing games, but there's more to this complaint than just a simple gripe with aiming and shooting. Depending on where you are in the story and specifically what the terrain you're fighting in is like, some of the levels are just awful to advance through. There's far more than just a couple occasions where you're forced into an area with dozens of enemies running and firing at you from multiple angles. What makes these kind of fights so intolerable at times is how few the options are for viable cover. One of the best ways to avoid dying in this game is to hide behind cover and wait for your enemies to give you an opening. Usually the more accurate weapons like the bow will give you deadlier ammo to shoot, and most NPCs will go down in 1 to 3 shots. The usefulness of cover is somewhat negated though when you constantly have to deal with grenades and Molotov cocktails being thrown at you, out of the frying pan and into the fire as it were. One of the largest sources of aggravation while playing games comes from players not feeling like they're given a choice of what to do in certain matters. Enemies that periodically try to flush you out of your cover and into the arms of dozens of waiting guards lines up pretty well with this negative aspect. I'm all for improving AI functionality in games, but there's a limit to how smart they can be before it becomes more of a chore. To be fair, even if you do die, the respawns are usually quite forgiving, bringing you back only to the beginning of the sub-area in which you died. What's more is that there's only a few fights throughout the entire 10+ hour campaign that really pile on the enemies. If you don't know what you're doing or you haven't taken the time to upgrade your weapons appropriately, it's gonna be a rough ride. The point at which the difficulty of the fights becomes painfully apparent is usually during some of the larger boss encounters. Take the final Oni boss for example. The first time I played, I had no idea what I was supposed to do. As far as I could tell, all of my bullets and arrows bounced right off his armor, and he moved much too fast for me to do anything useful. It got so bad that I actually had to look up how to defeat the boss, which as it turns out required shooting him in the back. That's not an easy task to do when you know what you're doing, let alone when you're left in the dark. The only other boss you fight that's similar to this is the Juggernaut during the endurance level, but even he can be shot in the head to be stunned. It's just an example of the fight mechanics failing to convey what you have to do to proceed, albeit the most egregious example the game has to offer. On the lighter side of gameplay issues would be the puzzles that you find throughout the levels being too difficult to solve immediately. This is entirely subjective as to whether it's a good or bad thing. Most of the puzzles in the main story progression can be solved in a minute tops, but I can remember about 3 distinct trials that took closer to 10 times that. Funnily enough, the worst example of the mandatory puzzles I can come up with is once again found towards the end of the game. You're given a large bell from which to swing and various other levers and pulley systems to operate. I honestly think this one is just a case of information overload. There's too many possibilities running through the average person's head to narrow down exactly what will be capable of bringing you to the ledge on the other side of the room. Other than these few, most of the difficult remaining puzzles are found throughout the secret tombs, which are optional side missions if you so desire to participate. I'm more okay with these ones being difficult since they're not blocking you from completing the game, just from finishing that perfectionist run. Again, I'd like to say that despite the amount of time I put into describing my gripes with this game, these problems aren't all too prevalent when you look at the whole picture. Yes, these issues are annoying at best when encountered, but they certainly aren't game-breaking. It's actually the unique variety of puzzles and action gameplay that give one of the most significant reasons to play Tomb Raider. There are very few titles out there that can compete with this particular niche, one of the biggest competitors being the sequel to this very game. To summarize, the Tomb Raider 2013 reboot is a deep, emotional, and thrilling game that has the ability to leave you awestruck in more ways than one. Its writing and voice acting leave it leaps and bounds ahead of anything else like it, and despite some minor difficulties presented through the typical gameplay experience, there's a lot to like. It's for these reasons that I find myself giving Tomb Raider 2013 a 9.0 out of 10. The game is fun, and that's not all it has going for it. It was expertly crafted into a work of art by professionals who had a vision and saw it through. I would highly recommend this game to literally anyone, since it has enough of everything to keep you interested. At the time of this review, Tomb Raider 2013 is available on PC for $19.99, though it also goes on sale multiple times a year, so I'd recommend waiting on that purchase. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this formal review, and if you did, feel free to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more like it, maybe even subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Links for my social media and whatnot are in the description below. And as for the comment question, of all the major character deaths in Tomb Raider, which one had the greatest impact on you personally? For me, it would probably be Grimm. This was the first time that we saw one of the main supporting characters go down, and it signaled a major turning point in the story. From there on out, we didn't know who was going to make it out alive, aside from Laura, obviously. I have a short video coming out tomorrow that will explain the little recommended seal you see next to the numerical score, so be sure to look out for that. Also, the Borderlands 2 Let's Play will officially start soon, so that'll be fun. Anyways, that's all the time I've got for today, so until next time, don't die.